I'd like to ask you where you were born.
I was born in Baltimore. My father and mother were also born in Baltimore.
And what part of the city did you grow up in?
Grew up in Forest Park, mostly.
And where is that located?
That's in northwest Baltimore.
Okay. And what did your parents do?
My father was a manager of a clothing factory. My mother was a homemaker, and they were just marvelous parents.
Were you an only child? Did you have
Only child.
Only child.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go to, I guess, elementary school? Did you go to public school?
All public schools. I went to 64. Forest Park was a junior high school then, and senior high school. I went to Forest Park Junior High. Then I went to Poly.
Now, at Poly, what activities were you involved in?
Well, I was in the A course, and in the Honor Society, we taught other students. I managed some of the teams, and I was involved in some of the publications.
Okay. So did you have any highlights of your high school education, any special teachers?
Poly was absolutely marvelous. And I took the advanced college course, and because of that, I was able to go at that time in the second year of any engineering school in the country. And I chose Johns Hopkins.
Why did you choose Hopkins?
I guess one of the reasons was it was a great school. Secondly, it was local. I went to a school that was in Baltimore, and it was by far the best.
So you had been familiar with engineering before you arrived at Hopkins? Had you been introduced to engineering concepts?
Yes, Polytechnic A course in those days gave a lot of college level courses,
Okay.
and so that I was quite familiar with what engineering was.
Okay, so how old were you when you entered Hopkins?
I was still 16, and I graduated when I was 19, which gave me a little head start.
It sure did. Why did you choose to study civil engineering?
I guess because I thought that was the best of the bunch. I wasn't really interested in mechanical or electrical or chemical. Civil engineering was for me. Incidentally, when I was in junior high school, a teacher asked us, how many of you boys are thinking about going to Poly in the A course? And I leaned over to a young man next to me, and I said, what's Poly? He said, I don't know, let's raise our hands. Now that's how you become an engineer.
When you were studying civil engineering, can you recall what was emphasized in your studies? Was it theoretical? Was it a practical approach?
Yeah. Well, it was a long time ago, and so a lot of the subjects that were taught are not necessarily relevant today. I took railroad engineering and highway railroad design, a lot of courses, a lot of surveying, which is less relevant today. Several, maybe 4 courses in surveying, because a civil engineer then, many of them were surveyors. Today that wouldn't apply.
Did you do any research when you were an undergraduate?
We did a little. Dr. Wallman, I was in the first class that Dr. Abel Wallman taught, and he had us do research.
What were your impressions of him?
He was absolutely marvelous. There were 2 teachers that always come to my mind when I think about Hopkins. That's Dr. Wallman and the structures teacher, Professor Comber. Absolutely marvelous teachers.
And what made them stand out?
Well, they knew their business, for one thing, and they were interested in the student, and they were absolutely super. They really taught, and they made sure that you knew what they were teaching.
So now we're at the end of your Hopkins career, and you're ready to go on. And can you tell us a little bit about what happens next?
Well, I graduated during the Depression, and jobs were very scarce. So I took a job as a draftsman in a machine shop until I got an engineering job. And what happened was that a young engineer left Whiting Turner, and so there was a vacancy. And they sent out to Johns Hopkins, as they often did, and they sent 3 or 4 young men out to be interviewed, and they hired somebody. And they fired him. And so they sent out for 3 or 4 more, and I was in the second group. And I remember that they asked me how my math was, and I thought they were talking about calculus or differential equations, and I said, it's okay. They were talking about arithmetic. This guy was making mistakes in arithmetic, and they fired him.
So they made the offer to you, and you accepted. So can you talk about your first position there at Whiting Turner and what it was like?
Well, my first salary was $35 a week, and glad to get it. And I was taking quantities off to help the estimator. And I was also doing some surveying and some field construction work early on.
Do you recall any projects that you were involved in those
early days?
Yeah.
In the early days, for 10 years, well, the first important job was a double-leaf bascule span in the middle of Cambridge, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. And I was a field engineer on that project, and that lasted about 1.5 years. After that, I spent 10 years in the field as an engineer and later as a superintendent on a huge construction job in Curtis Bay.
Now, I guess it was about maybe 10 or 15 years you rose through the ranks of Whiting Turner. Can you talk about that and how you came to have a high-level position?
Well, Mr. Whiting, the founder of the company, he founded the company in 1909. The company's name was Whiting Turner. Mr. Turner was a classmate of Mr. Whiting's at MIT. They started the company in 1909. Mr. Turner didn't like construction, and Mr. Whiting bought him out in 1910. And they had been doing quite well, or the company had been doing quite well. They had their ups and downs. They did a water tunnel from Druid Hill Lake to Montebello in Baltimore, and had a problem with that. And then they started back over again. And Mr. Whiting was a great mentor. Also had a wonderful boss, Mr. Philippi, who was certainly one of the greatest not financial, but construction people that I knew, or I've ever known. About 1955, Mr. Whiting saw fit to put me in charge of everybody. He made me president, and I've been president since 1955. He was an absolutely marvelous person. He was my mentor. He was a great engineer, a great student of engineering, and he had a marvelous business head also. And he made me president in 1955. Then 10 years before he passed away, he made sure I had all the voting stock. And then when he died, I got all the stock. So I'm the only stockholder of Whiting Turner.
Okay. What did you go through when you first were president, and what do you think were some of the valuable lessons that Mr. Whiting taught you?
Mr. Whiting taught me everything that he was way ahead of his time. For example, he taught me about post-tension concrete 20 years before it became practical in the field. He was and a marvelous leader, and as I said, a great businessman. At one time, he borrowed money from a bank, and the banker did what they usually do. How do I know I'm going to get my money back? And a lot of questions like that. And Mr. Whiting sat me down, as he often did, and said, I feel the fingers of the banker around my throat. If you can possibly, in the future, avoid borrowing money, that's a very good idea. And we haven't borrowed money since 1938. And so I listened to what he said.
That might be a record. How did you meet him first? Did he take time to meet all of his employees, or do you think that you might have been singled out by him?
Well, I didn't meet him when I was hired,
Okay.
but he took a personal interest. I remember he gave me a book, Railroad Engineering. And he said, it's a real thick book, about 3 or 4 inches thick. And he said, you won't be a good engineer unless you know everything about this book. And I'm sorry to say, because we did no railroad work, that I never cracked the book. But he was always teaching. And he was my mentor.
Do you think the changes in the business climate over the years have changed the way that you run the business?
Well, there's no question about that. As far as our company is concerned, when I came, all the company did was bridge work and some industrial work. Over the years, we've changed completely. We still do some bridges. We did the second Chesapeake Bay Bridge, but now we've gotten into just about every kind of work except houses and road grading and paving. We're the largest builder of shopping malls in the country, and that's just one of our types of work.
Are you the largest construction company in Maryland?
No, in Maryland, there's another company in the Washington area that has a bigger volume than we did, but I think that we're, out of 35,000 large companies, I think we're 14th in the country. I'm not sure. When I started, we did $89,000 worth of work the first year. Now, inflation, of course, has come in. Last year, we did $1.3 billion in the year.
Some growth. Okay, well, let's kind of flip back to Hopkins a little bit. After you graduated, did you maintain, and right now I'm talking about the period primarily from, I guess, 1938 up through the early 60s, did you maintain an involvement with Hopkins?
Yes, there was some involvement. For too long, I was put on the board of trustees, and that was very interesting to me. What was on my mind was that after World War II, some of the universities had phased out their engineering school. Hopkins did, Yale did, and some other very highly rated companies phased out their engineering school. And I thought that was terrible. And so I headed up a committee of the board to recommend that they resurrect the engineering school at Hopkins. And the board saw fit to do that. We really got a break because the first dean of the new recreated engineering school was Dr. Owen. Dr. Owen was also dean of arts and science, so it was the fact that he was dean of both schools made the transition easy. Because prior to that, all that was left of the engineering school was engineering science, which was under the art school. So the fact that we got Dr. Owen to be the first dean of the recreated school was a break.
And I guess were you involved in trying to maybe stop the university from getting rid of the engineering school and before it happened in 1966?
No, I wasn't active at that time. And I really thought that was a wrong thing to do. Mm-hmm. But after World War II, for some reason, it was unpopular to be an engineer. It was like being a mechanic. Mm-hmm. And so that's the reason that some of the schools did it. But Dr. Muller was president at the time, and the board was receptive to our proposal. Dr. Woolman was helpful. There were several members of the board that were helpful. And I directed, Mr. Whiting had died. And in those days, you were allowed, the tax collector would let you give half of your money to your wife, tax-free, and the other half to a cultural or educational institution. And I directed half of Mr. Whiting's estate to Johns Hopkins for the purpose of recreating the engineering school. And the school was very kind and named the school for Mr. Whiting. I thought he'd like that, except that he went to MIT, but he was dead and I couldn't ask him.
I guess now we're approaching we're in an anniversary year, 85 years of engineering at Hopkins and 20 years of the Whiting School. Could you comment on the Whiting School? Can you tell us your thoughts about that as you've watched it grow over the years?
It has developed into a school that's far greater than I had anticipated. I had anticipated a small, good, small school, high quality, and a school that related to industry in the area. The people that have run the school and the staff have exceeded any expectations that I ever had. It's a marvelous school. I think it's rated about 15th now out of hundreds of engineering schools in the country. And I strongly believe that it'll be up in the top 5 before too long. It's a great school.
What do you think the Whiting School should do to, I guess, or have you thought about, I guess, for outreach to the community, or what relationships do you think would help the school to have with the community?
They can have a stronger relationship to the industrial area in Baltimore and in Maryland. I think that strengthening would be helpful.
Guess, do you have any vision of where you would like to see the engineering school in the next 5 years?
Yeah,
the next 10 years?
I'd like to see it up in the top 5. Yeah, and I think it will be. It's got a lot of strong disciplines. Biomedical engineering is the best in the country, bar none. And the other schools are wonderful, really wonderful. And it's only people. We have marvelous people in the Whiting School.
Well, the other thing I'd like to talk about is you've not only helped the Whiting School of Engineering so much, you've also helped the entire region of Baltimore. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy of giving to the community? It touches so many lives and so many organizations.
Well, I guess the philosophy is that I believe that we were here to help other people. And also I have a philosophy that says, if you give $1 to help others, the Lord will give you 10 back. Now that has never failed.
Are there some projects that you'd like to mention that mean a lot to you?
What type of projects?
Oh, it's philanthropic projects.
Well, I have to say that Johns Hopkins has always been first, the hospital and the university. There are many others, many others, and if I named a few, I'd be slighting the others. And most of them are very, very worthy.
Well, as someone who's been successful in business, what do you think is the importance of business concepts in engineering education?
Nominal. It would be helpful if you had a nominal amount of a business education involved in the engineering. Not too much. I think you pick most of that up by experience. I think the concentration should be on engineering with a little bit of business.
That's a good point. Do you have any advice for engineering students who are just starting out? I guess.
After graduation?
Yes, after graduation.
I think that a graduate should look to his future not as being taught today that in your career you're going to have 5 or 6 different jobs. They should look toward a career rather than a job, and hopefully spend their entire life dedicated to one type of company, or one company. Much better than jumping from one job to another. We hire about 125 engineers every year from schools around the country, and then we train them. And although I mentioned that I'm the only stockholder, I have given almost all of the profit to the people in the company. They are doing the work and they deserve the profit. This may be the only company of any kind in the United States where somebody owns the company where the people get the profit. And since I did that, the net worth of the company has gone up by a multiple of 7. We're 7 times as large as we were when I decided to give the people the profit. And they are marvelous. When I say we train them after we get them out of school, and we go to the schools that are around the country, our branches are around the country. We have an intensive training program after they graduate. Also, they can come to work for us in the summers while they're going to school and get to know what we're like.
So you're still actively involved in the company?
Sure.
How many employees does it have now?
We have about a couple thousand permanent employees, mostly engineers. In the course of a year, because we hire and fire carpenters and iron workers and so forth, we can have between 5,000 and 10,000 employees.
I think that's about it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
You think I'm proud of the company?
Oh, I know you are. I can tell that you are. You have every reason to be. It's a wonderful company. I learned a lot.
I could talk the rest of the week about the company.
I think it is so important to give back to the people, because that maintains their investment.
Oh. We have profit sharing. The people can take down some money when their children are going to college. They need it for tuition and so forth. Incidentally, I think I was the first student, maybe in the country, that paid tuition on an installment basis. When I went over to register at Hopkins, I asked the registrar. The tuition was $450 a year, that's all. And we always lived well, but I don't think my father ever saw $450 in one place. So I asked him whether I could pay $45 a month, and she said she never heard of that. It was a lady registrar. She went back and asked somebody and came back and said, it'd be all right. So I worked and my father helped out. And I made it every month, $45.
That's great. That's right. I neglected to ask you to say something about the Hackerman Student Loan Fund at Hopkins for engineering students.
There are there's a Hackerman civil engineer. I think Mrs. Whiting gave a chair in civil engineering at Hopkins. And there is a student loan fund. Some years ago, I was president of an outfit called Central Scholarship Bureau that lends money interest-free, and it's returned into the fund. And I thought that would be good for Hopkins, so that's the reason that that fund is an interest-free loan fund. And I think it works.
Well, I think it's certainly helpful, given today's tuition prices.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. The Hackerman chair was first held by Dr. Kurotis, and he's now dean of his own engineering school.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah, great people. Hopkins has great people, and we've had great deans and of the engineering school, and we've had great acting deans, and I hope that the present dean, I wish her every success, and I think she'll be fine.
and Dr. Ellingwood is the current holder of the professorship.
Yeah, that's right. Great school.